Marlowe travels overland for 200 miles with a caravan of 60 men. He has one white companion who falls ill and must be carried by the native bearers, who start to desert because of the added burden. After 15 days they arrive at the dilapidated central station. Marlowe finds that the steamer he was to command has sunk. The general manager of the central station had taken the boat out 2 days before under the charge of a volunteer skipper, and they had torn the bottom out on some rocks. In light of what he later learns, Marlowe suspects the damage to the steamer may have been intentional, to keep him from reaching Kurtz. Marlowe soon meets with the general manager, who strikes him as an altogether average man who leads by inspiring an odd uneasiness in those around him and whose authority derives merely from his resistance to tropical disease. The manager tells Marlowe that he took the boat out in a hurry to relieve the inner stations, especially the one belonging to Kurtz, who is rumored to be ill. He praises Kurtz as an exceptional agent and takes note that Kurtz is talked about on the coast. Marlowe sets to work dredging his ship out of the river and repairing it, which ends up taking 3 months. One day during this time, a grass shed housing some trade goods burns down, and the native laborers dance delightedly as it burns. One of the natives is accused of causing the fire and is beaten severely. He disappears into the forest after he recovers. Marlowe overhears the manager talking with the brickmaker about Kurtz at the side of the burned hut. He enters into conversation with the brickmaker after the manager leaves, and ends up accompanying the man back to his quarters, which are noticeably more luxurious than those of the other agents. Marlowe realizes after a while that the brickmaker is pumping him for information about the intentions of the company's board of directors in Europe, about which, of course, Marlowe knows nothing. Marlowe notices an unusual painting on the wall, of a blindfolded woman with a lighted torch. When he asks about it, the brickmaker reveals that it is Kurtz's work. The brickmaker tells Marlowe that Kurtz is a prodigy, sent as a special emissary of Western ideals by the company's directors and bound for quick advancement. He also reveals that he has seen confidential correspondence dealing with Marlowe's appointment, from which he has construed that Marlowe is also a favorite of the administration. They go outside, and the brickmaker tries to get himself into Marlowe's good graces and Kurtz's by proxy, since he believes Marlowe is allied with Kurtz. Marlowe realizes the brickmaker had planned on being assistant manager, and Kurtz's arrival has upset his chances. Seeing an opportunity to use the brickmaker's influence to his own ends, Marlowe lets the man believe he really does have influence in Europe and tells him that he wants a quantity of rivets from the coast to repair his ship. The brickmaker leaves him with a veiled threat on his life, but Marlowe enjoys his obvious distress and confusion. Marlowe finds his foreman sitting on the deck of the ship and tells him that they will have rivets in 3 weeks, and they both dance around exuberantly. The rivets do not come, however. Instead, the El Dorado exploring expedition, a group of white men intent on tearing treasure out of the bowels of the land, arrives, led by the manager's uncle, who spends his entire time at the station talking conspiratorially with his nephew. Marlowe gives up on ever receiving the rivets he needs to repair his ship, and turns to wondering disinterestedly about Kurtz and his ideals. As Marlowe describes his caravan journey through the depopulated interior of the colony, he remarks ironically that he was becoming scientifically interesting, an allusion to his conversation with the company doctor in Brussels. Given this, it is curious that Marlowe talks so little about the caravan journey itself. In part, this is because it's not directly relevant to his story. During this time he is neither in contact with representatives of the company nor moving directly toward Kurtz. Nonetheless, something about this journey renders Marlowe a mystery even to himself. He starts to think of himself as a potential case study. Africa appears to him to be something that happens to a man, without his consent. One way to interpret this is that Marlowe is disowning his own responsibility and that of his fellow employees for the atrocities committed by the company on the natives. Because of its merciless environment and savage inhabitants, Africa itself is responsible for colonial violence. Forced to deal with his ailing companion and a group of native porters who continually desert and abandon their loads, Marlowe finds himself at the top of the proverbial slippery slope. The men he finds at the central station allow him to regain his perspective, however. The goings-on here are ridiculous. For example, Marlowe watches a man try to extinguish a fire using a bucket with a hole in it. The manager and the brickmaker, the men in charge, are repeatedly described as hollow, papier-mâché figures. For Marlowe, who has just experienced the surreal horrors of the continent's interior, the idea that a man's exterior may conceal only a void is disturbing. The alternative, of course, is that at the heart of these men lies not a void but a vast, malevolent conspiracy. The machinations of the manager and the brickmaker suggest that, paradoxically, both ideas are correct, that these men indeed conceal bad intentions, but that these intentions, despite the fact that they lead to apparent evil, are meaningless in light of their context. The use of religious language to describe the agents of the central station reinforces this paradoxical idea. Marlowe calls the company's rank and file pilgrims, both for their habit of carrying staves with which to beat native laborers and for their mindless worship of the wealth to be had from ivory.